All right, thank you for staying with the Monday Report. The discussion starts right now. We're calling it After the Rage, Then What Next? My guests are with me in studio, Faith Odhiambo, LSK President, Franklin Mkwanja, Executive Director, CMD, and Onduko Rosasi, Youth Development Enthusiast. But before we get into all that, Faith, I'll start with you. The LSK is supposed to have given a name for the IEBC selection panel. Who is the person and why has it taken you this long?
It's not taken us long. We submitted the name of our nominee. Our nominee is Caroline Kituku.
Caroline Kituku?
Yes.
Why her?
Because she met the requirements. So we sent out a notice to our members to apply for the position. The members reviewed, and she was the candidate that the council picked. Okay.
When did you submit this name? Because up until the time we're going on air, LSK had not submitted a name.
We submitted it. I think maybe it's Parliament has not released the name of our nominee, but I believe it was on Thursday or Friday we submitted, yeah.
So this was done way in advance?
Yes.
All right. Frank, let me bring you in on this. Let's talk about that IEBC reconstitution itself. We seem to be getting this wrong every single time there's a reconstitution of IEBC. At this particular point, as the selection panel is being put in place, what should they consider? And how do we ensure that we don't go back to the same issues that we've always had?
Thank you for having me, Trevor. First is we can't afford to go wrong on this occasion. But I'm afraid that we still have made fundamental mistakes leading into this process. First is having been involved sufficiently in the process, I have a feeling that we shifted away from the fundamental issues. And if you look at the profiled reforms, we focused on the process of appointing commissioners, and in my view, have more political representation than any other. And I see quite a challenge there, that there can be challenges in terms of settling on the candidates because of the unseen hands in the machinations of the panel, and I just cross my fingers and hope that that does not happen, and wish the committee well in terms of getting sober Kenyans that are merited to handle this very sensitive job. But in terms of the actual reform process, I was a little bit taken aback by the work of the National Dialogue Committee that tended to focus on the basics of constituting a selection panel, ignoring a lot of work that has been done through various institutions like LSK, through the presidential petitions, Katiba Institute, and even the Supreme Court rulings, several rulings by the Supreme Court, which have defined the constitutional, operational, and political issues that bedevil IEBC, that I expected that Parliament would, and we made these submissions as stakeholders, that Parliament would have gone into to consider clearly, so that then the reforms are done in a way that we have a functional IEBC. There is cohesive in the team. There's a clear demarcation between the secretariat and the commissioners, and we do not seem to have the challenges of Hassan and Oswago and Chiloba and Chebukati, and then the boardroom rupture that we had at the last minute. So I am a little bit hesitant to really be hopeful that we have nailed it finally, but I just hope that this selection panel does its job, and if Kenyans wanted to challenge these things, then they realize that now it is in their hands and not much about the political processes that seem to have some leash, however long it is, that they start mentality that these appointees have a connection to listening like your earpiece to some instructions, which makes me a little bit hesitant to be a believer.
Onduko, what would you like to see as the young generation in terms of the constitution of the IEBC? Who are the people you'd like to see there?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me here. And before I go into the discussion of the IEBC reconstitution, I think I need to also talk about the fact that Trevor, the rage is still on. I know we are talking about after the rage, but the rage is still on. Because look, I think that what we are trying to do right now is to liberate the nation, and so that we can move forward. And to me, I think that the point of liberation is to rewrite the rules and to ensure that justice, fairness, opportunity is the condition of man, not just the dream of man. But my sense is that we haven't gotten there yet. Justice, you just read news here, there's still people that are missing, right? And so these things, because we are still far away from opportunities, we are still far away from fairness, equality, justice, the rate is exponentially growing. So I think I need to tell you that it is coming as a great shock, especially for the Kenyan people, that the flag to which you're paying allegiance does not pay allegiance back to you, and not organically, because there are people responsible for that that just choose to tilt that in another way, or that the Kenyan pie that should be enough for everyone, there's a huge percentage that's being taken by certain people. So I think, first of all, I should be able to make it certain, I should be able to make it clear that the rage is still on, so that you understand, as you're moving on to all this discussion, there is somewhere that Gen Zs are coming from, right? So in terms of IEBC reconstitution, I think that, first of all, if we do not trust, if the only way for us to have a credible election is to have also these kinds of representation, it, I think, also speaks to the problem of trust that we have, right? If the only way for us to ensure a credible election is to also have, you know, Azimio people bringing their people and Kenya Kwanza people bringing their people, and this is the call that people have always been having, that can we just sit back and trust the systems that they're working? But I should say that where we are right now, and I'm made to understand that she's just said that they have already thrusted forward their person, their nominee, yeah. Their nominee. My anticipation should be that these people that are going to be part of the selection panel and the recruitment and responsible for the recruitment will think about capacity. First of all, are these people leaders? Are these people that are able to exercise a very huge judgment? And we expect that they should be able to look and scrutinize in ways that we have not seen before, because we are at a crisis right now. The trust deficit is waning every single day. And we need them to do that fast, because we have a job to do, which is recalling the members of parliament that already crossed the Rubicon. We need to begin that process of recalling them. So I really would love to speak to those people out there that will be responsible, that they've got to do their job right. Okay. We are watching, accountability. Our role of just looking at things panoramically, I think, is heightened. And we need them to look at capacity. The primary concern should be, are these people able to do that job? Yeah. But I do not think that this is a sustainable thing that will act as a silver bullet to solve the problems that we've been having after every election cycle. Okay. And Faith, before we get into that, what Onduko is saying is interesting, that they're going to look at capacity. But we're increasingly getting to a moment where capacity and even your intellectual capacity or even your credibility is so subjective rather than objective, because it doesn't matter who is elected there, or it doesn't matter who's picked as a commissioner, someone will always have something to say, and it's really a matter of how subjective your perception is. What more needs to be done in terms of the legal framework that can then galvanize our electoral system? Because we've had the Kiai case, we've had the PIC, which is the Maraga case. In terms of legally, what more should we do as a country? Well, just speaking from what some of the previous panelists have said, is that
I was hoping to see part of the changes would have been the vice should have the same capacity as the chair, so that the problem that we had last time, because the vice did not meet the legal requirements to step in as a chair in case there was anything that arose. So the scenario that we have, in event that they don't choose somebody who meets the same capacity because it's an advocate and of 15 years in practice. So if we don't have similar requirements, then you have a situation whereby there's no one who can step in event that something happens to the chair. But even apart from that, I think things that need to be put in legally is maybe we are more strict in terms of what requirements, in terms of technical experience, because someone's integrity is subjective, and we can only judge them based on our Leadership and Integrity Act, which I say, unfortunately, the kind of things we have seen in our country from the last elections, we have seen those who all their cases are available for all and sundry. They pass through that needle. I'd say that it's no longer a needle hole. It's as wide as it can be. Everyone passes through, unless you're not politically correct. And so I would say that just speaking from the trust issues, we need to start having honest conversations in this country and holding certain institutions accountable, such that if this rage should go to the relevant institutions as well. It's not just about saying that there are problems in the government, but how did they become a government? Because we have institutions that have been set constitutionally that should ensure that we vet and not have situations that we're having now. But because we want to all be politically correct, we're allowing these borders to be porous, such that we have leaders who should not be allowed to vie and even be on those ballots, even be able to hold public offices, are being allowed so. I would say that one of the bravest things judiciary has ever done was, the Sonko case as well as Moitito case. Those are, elements that have allowed and is showing people that you can actually be barred from vying and holding public office. And the opportunities for them to hold other offices have been stopped. And I hope our courts will stay true to that, that we don't see them trying to reverse those positions. But the reality is, unless we start having some serious, honest conversations, and also a lot of accountability and transparency. Because once the panel is set and they're gazetted and they call for applications, we want to see all those applicants before we see the shortlisted list, because that is how even the good candidates are kicked out, because you're not politically correct, you're not from. That's how Kenyans can start having these honest conversations, because when we see all people who have applied for those positions, we can now put in our voices and raise hue and cry, so that also the panel is able to be accountable. They're also under some sort of pressure from the people of Kenya, not just any political masters, because unfortunately the political parties have majority of the vote, and the church has 2 votes, and I hope also the church is going to use those votes appropriately, as well as we hope that we will also put pressure on our nominee to ensure that they also carry out their work judiciously. But the fact is that we need that transparency. We need to know how many have applied. Let that list be shared to members of the public. Then we see vis-a-vis who is shortlisted, so that we'll be able to see what are the strings, and we can also now make noise and also hold that panel accountable, because it's not just sitting in the panel, so that even those who have gone with instructions, we can also put them to account, that it's not just going to follow certain instructions. Let's start having commissioners who are free from any entanglements. Then they'll be able to serve the people of Kenya.
Frank, the constitution of this IEBC selection panel, is it above board, or is it what will cure our issues in your way? Because first, after the IEBC Amendment Act, the LSK has 1 slot, the Parliamentary Service Commission has 2, the Interreligious Council has 2, Institute of Certified Public Accountants, that is ISPAC, has 1, Political Parties Liaison Committee has 3, a total of 9. Will that solve our issues? Is that a good start?
I think the challenge you have, Trevor, is that and that also afflicts what we are hearing from the president about the reconstitution of the cabinet, this word you called unity government. We are dealing in this country from an approach of intra-elite collusion. And I can't help but look at that as an intra-elite collusion, because what has changed is just the addition of the political class. If you look at that composition, it's 5 out of 4. 5 out of 9 that are political. Parliamentary Service Commission, it's again the majority and minority party that are going to make the decision on who actually is joining. And then the other 3 are also coming from the political groupings. And if the decisions are down to voting, then you can already see that the political class already has an undue advantage over the others. I am aware that ISPAC may have gone through a process. The LSK president has already told us that they went through a process. People applied and got picked based on their merit. But can the religious organizations also tell us what process they have gone through to be able to arrive at the 2 that are on the panel? And then, of course, we know what is going on, what's happening with the 5. It's about political interests.
In fact, today, Azimio withdrew one name of Augustus Muli that already replaced it with Koki Muli, saying that Augustus Muli does not meet what the requirements they want. We also want, beyond that, just looking at the applicants' capacity and the transparency in the process of arriving at the applicants and the shortlisted applicants, we also want to hear a little bit more about how the religious organizations have gone about the picking of the 2, how the LSK has, what kind of qualifications they ask, and then I hope that the LSK president lets us into that conversation. How have we determined that this is the right person with the capacity to actually assess the capacity of the others? Because we agree that the issue of integrity is relative, but you can actually be able to assess the technical capabilities of these candidates to run a huge operation as an election. Because we already, as we agree with the LSK president here, that the critical issues about operational challenges, about constitutional and political upheavals of the commission have not been addressed. So you really need well-experienced, exposed individuals who understand the grand duty of running an election operation, so that we do not have the challenges that we had, because this country is teetering on a cliff. And if we continue with what we have seen in the last 1 month and move it to fallout in the general elections 2027, if we will get there, I reckon we will not have done a service to our country. Okay. Onduku, as a young person, and do you feel involved in this structure? Because this is where it starts. You said that your rage is still on and you want to recall some of these members of parliament. The IEBC selection panel is being constituted as we speak.
Right.
In fact, so far we have about 7. They're just 2 more names. And then they have 90 days to pick, to shortlist and present to the president. Do you feel included in this get-go? Because this is where it starts.
Well, not entirely, because like they have said that, and there's a concern for Gen Zs and maybe even the people, because part of the thing that we need to understand is that this movement of the Gen Z is moving from just being a question of Gen Zs to being with the people, right? Calling for all these inclusivities and so forth. But if you've been keen to listen, and this is a question that we have been asking again and again, are people really listening to what this younger generation is talking about? If you've been keenly listening, we are saying that if you can be able to put in some values in the processes, perhaps we would be okay minding our business and just doing the things that we are supposed to do as ordinary citizens, but we know that there are certain things that are happening, right? Something like transparency, right? If you have Azimio, for example, already removing a name and it's not clear why and so on, then we begin to question from the get-go, why are these things happening? When you have certain bodies presenting the names of the people and we do not get clear communication as to why these people and how was the process and what are their qualifications and so on. So we begin to question such things. And I think that if these processes would be transparent, if there would be a sense of trust, and again it gets back to the leadership, because over the years, or even the last 2 years, which I think that the levels of trust in the country has significantly receded. If these things would be working, then we would say, you know what, we as Gen Zs, we are not even so much concerned about representation, but rather competence of those people, the process, is it okay? The leaders or the people that are there, are they matching up to the requirements of the job?
But how will you determine that? That has always been the concern. How?
I think that there are technical capacities, because look, for example, in IEBC, one of the questions that has really been coming to the fore is, are we able to safeguard, say, the technical aspects, say procurement? And that is where the political people now would want to focus on how are these things, if there are people that have ill motives, for example. So how do you ensure that people out there, Gen Zs included, or just we the people, all of us, we are certain that the process of procurement of essentials that are supposed to be used in an election are safeguarded, right? And I think that is the thing that we should be asking ourselves. These people are, and it gets back to meritocracy, it gets back to competence, it gets back to processes that are working rightly, right? And of course, it also has to do something with the people that are coming in, because systems also cannot work in isolation. It requires people that can be able to drive it.
Okay.
Right.
And let me bring in Faith on this. Faith, you mentioned something interesting, that you were hoping that at some point the vice and the chair would have same equal powers, but equal qualification.
Yeah.
But then, is the double layering even necessary, where we have the commission and then we have the secretariat? Is that even necessary?
To have a commission
in the IEBC, yes. If we're talking about reforming the entire system, is the double layering necessary?
Well, I think the secretariat is important because they should be carrying out their daily mandate, and that's why in the last Supreme Court decision, the court has to come in to talk about governance and governance structures and how the board makes a decision, because the board is separate from the secretariat, should be doing their normal work, of course by the directions of the chair and the commission. And I think it's important so that in any given time, irrespective of, if we didn't have that, we would have a totally dysfunctional IEBC. Nothing would be happening because we've not had a commission for quite a while. And I thought at some point it would have been a moment to have gone to court and the court to give directions in terms of there was no commission, but there was a secretariat. Should we have sat and done delineation of boundaries without a commission? That would have been a moment that would be able to see at the secretariat able to function without the commission. But I believe the commission should be there and should be independent. And I'm not averse to the fact that probably it's good for this country because of our levels of trust, that after every election, probably we don't need to still have the same commission, so that you know you're supposed to carry out your job. But for the secretariat, there needs to be that consistency. Or maybe if we have the same commission but they retire at different points. What I was talking about the chair and the vice chair was, let's say in event something happens and we know our trust levels in elections and someone picks up the chair, like the allegations that were there that at some point the chair had disappeared, meaning that we cannot announce the elections because there is no one who can step to the position, has the qualifications as the chair to act as the chair for that given period of time. And so there are things that we can avoid by preempting, and you know, it's also good for competence to support. The chair has equal support at that level in his commission. But I think it's still important to have the secretary. The CEO should carry out his mandate or her mandate. The commission led by the chairperson should be able to carry out their mandate, and to ensure that at some point it's a bit level of seamless when each has their specific roles and they know what they're supposed to do. Commissioners play more of a political role as well, while the secretariat should be carrying out the administrative work. We shouldn't see the CEO carrying out any political work or meeting with any deemed politicians. That should be the role of the commission.
Okay. And there's a question that Frank asked, that how did you get to your nominee? How did you decide?
So we advertised for a nominee nominees, we shortlisted, we reviewed and looked at their capacities, and then we chose which was the best, what we deemed as the best candidate, also taking into consideration gender as well, and also trying to look at regional balance based on the other nominations we have given over time as well. And looking at the capacities, this person, we didn't pick such an old person because we're pretty much also a young council, but we looked at is this person competent, does her experience enable her to be able to carry out that duty, and furthermore that as the council will be holding our nominee accountable and calling her to answer hard questions in event we feel what she's doing on that panel is not what the council expects in terms of being accountable and being able to identify possible commissioners, taking into considerations LSK has continued to be an amicus for most election petitions. So we want to see a commission that will be a bit of above board. We want to see, irrespective of the fact that she may be outnumbered, but she'll be able to strongly articulate the legal issues and also support that panel in terms of what will be any legal challenges that they may have. She'll be able to carry out that mandate.
At a time when Azimio is switching names, are you concerned that her name has not been released to the public?
Well, we have given our name and we have released, so I'm holding on to trust because we submitted our name in accordance to what was required. So in event that any murky business, we still have the courts, and the chair has no role in terms of changing that name. So we submitted, we gave the name as required, and so I don't know why it's not been released, but I have shared who the nominee is, so I don't foresee any problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is she a practicing advocate?
She is a practicing.
You said her name is Caroline?
Yes, yes.
Caroline who?
Kituku.
Kituku.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Well, let me just chime in to drive this point home. That you now see that out of 9 panelists, potentially 5 to 7 have come in through without a very clear criteria of how they were arrived at, other than PPLC, which is election. We are in democracy, yes, but I would want to interrogate that process a little bit. Was there anything beyond people just voting for so and so? The others, we can see it's clearly a political process who are representing minority and majority interests. Yeah. And then also the religious leaders need to come out because trust deficit can only be addressed where there is sufficient information, if we're all on the same page. In this case, we have a huge doubt about 5 to 7 of the 9 panelists. Give and take, LSK and ISPAC can convince us on the process of how they have competently sought their representatives and the mechanisms to be able to hold them to account on the narrow, straight and narrow. But I'm not sure about this, and that's why I'm really, really bothered that the electoral reforms first focused on a lesser evil about constituting a panel to recruit IEBC commissioners instead of the real operational, the real political, the real legal and constitutional upheavals that the courts have spoken about in all these elections since 2013.
Okay, let's now talk about politics a bit, and Nduka, I'll start with you on this. What do we have now? The president says this is a government of national unity. Many people are saying it is a coalition government. What do you see it as, Gen Z? What is this?
Trevor, when the president was campaigning, it was so clear, and he made it sort of part of his stump speech. He would go and say that, you know what, from going forward, this government will be a government of the ordinary people. And these are the people that will constitute the government. That was his words. But a few years later, or a few months after winning election, things didn't go as the way he said, right? And it became clear that the old ways of doing politics is the way that he was going to do it, which is, for you to secure re-election, you have to appoint people strategically here and there, right? So that you have a political clout, you have a political influence. And I've said before to you that, to me, that is not a broad-based government. A broad-based government is where everybody is heard. A broad-based government is where anyone who's willing to work hard can be rewarded for that thing. And I will take you back to, look at it this way, that it is a few years to 1963. And there are people there that are saying, you know what, we think that this is our country and we have dreams, we have aspiration, but we cannot be able to breathe life into these dreams. So what do? We have to create a government that allows us to define our own future. And they call that probably the Kenyan dream. And so my anticipation is that every time we, or the leadership is thinking about government, it should go back to the dreams of the forebears and ask, are we doing right by the Kenyan dream? Are we creating opportunities for everyone? And you're seeing that with the cabinet that has been proposed by the president, right? The first thing that people should be looking at, or the president should be looking at, is capacity. That should be the primary concern. After you have been certified that there's a lot of competence, then think about these other ways of inclusivity and so on. Because I can tell you for a fact, the river does not rise above its source. No, it does not. The quality of governance is constrained by the quality of its leaders. And if you're going to play politics about the cabinet reshuffles and all those things, and it will constrain service delivery, then I don't know what you're doing. Okay. Right? And so I think that should have been the first. We shouldn't even be talking about cabinet vetting, for example, Trevor. Honestly, we should not be talking about that. Because these same people are, look at football, for example. Right now, after Euros, people are going for the greatest talent. Something as maybe trivial as football, but people are focusing on who's the best. And I want to ask you a question and probably also pose that question to the country. If this cabinet failed to deliver in ordinary circumstance, do you think that they will deliver in the crisis that we are in right now? If they failed in ordinary circumstance, I think we would be delulu to think that they are going to deliver in extraordinary times. Okay. Right? So I think that they have failed. I think that the president has not been truthful and considerate to think about people, to think about service delivery, and just to get the job right. And like I told you the other time, is that he cannot be able to do right because he is probably, and by him I mean probably the political class at large, they are the gatekeepers of the status quo, and they will lose out if they decide to change things. Okay.
Right? And Faith, do you see what you legal minds like to call a lacuna, like a gap in legal issues, especially when it comes to the legislature holding the executive to account? Considering now there seems to be a push and pull. Is this a national government unity? Is it a cohesion government? Has the opposition gotten into government? Nobody knows. Do you see any legal challenges going forward, especially when it comes to accountability?
Well, let me just say, first of all, Parliament had already failed us. In terms of accountability, we wouldn't have had the Occupy Parliament if Parliament actually did its role. You see, the three arms of government work together, but at the same time, they overlap one another in terms of checks and balances. So ideally, we should be having the Parliament vetting what executive is presenting. And I say, unfortunately, responsibility starts from the top, and it starts with the head of the state. And I say that because as much as he may have had good intentions, but the fact that we see the chairman of the Budgetary and Finance Committee coming to make a statement alongside the president, the deputy president, a majority of KK members of parliament, then he goes to parliament with that same presentation to come and say that now we have considered and this is what we're giving you. This is the favor we're giving you, yet instead of giving proper leadership at the first instance as the head of state. And so he had already he had already broken in terms of the structures that should be there in Parliament. We should have an independent Parliament from the executive. But what we've had is that the executive is controlling Parliament, and that can be obviously seen by them moving from one side with the exact proposal, coming to Parliament to present, then implementing. I say as well as the case that we have on KDF, as much as the matter is ongoing, but the reality is we saw Parliament on a record time, 30 minutes, approving an illegality. In fact, on a Gazette notice that does not exist. And they approved it, it went through, and they hurriedly left Parliament. And so at that instance, even if we're talking about the situation that is right now, Parliament has already failed the people of Kenya. That's why the Gen Zs wanted to remove those parliamentarians as soon as yesterday. And that's quite a huge indictment to Parliament, because they had not even spent, I don't think they've completed the exact 2 years. Because I know the Constitution provides before you seek to remove them, there's a 2-year period before you can seek their removal. But now the situation that we have right now, what we'd see is the head of state was making an expedient plan, because he knew that the other side is going to shoot down his nominees if they don't have a piece of the pie. And that was a discussion I was having earlier, that the more people keep saying that the Gen Zs are absolutely leaderless, which is fine if that's what they want, the reality is others are going to ride on the wave they've created. People have died, people have lost lives, people have been tortured, and yet now you see those who are coming to sit at the table are not the Gen Zs. And the question is, who is talking about the interests of the Gen Zs? When we see these nominees that are coming back, being presented, who is representing the Gen Zs? Who is talking about the concerns that the Gen Zs have? How are we going to hold accountable the policemen who have shot and killed our young men and women? How are we going to hold accountable the government? The president said, tell me who has disappeared. Lists has been given by the civil society as well as the Kenya National Commission of Human Rights that we work also closely with, the number of people that have since disappeared. And you can go on national TV and say, tell me just one person who has disappeared. Two, in terms of, he talks about compensation, but we have not seen even one. Rex's mother has come out. She was the first to lose her child. No compensation has been given. We've seen families, Denzel disappeared and reappeared dead. That's why we have the quagmire that we have today, because Rex's friend is afraid to come and record statements because of the pain of knowing what happened to others. He fears being another Denzel in the story, because there's no hero, dead men tell no tales. And so that fear is real. And so when we see what is happening, there's still no justice for the victims. And no one is now talking about that, because those are the things that we ought to be talking about. We cannot move on as a country and even be talking about these nominees, and we aren't talking about the crucial, important things. How are we going to talk about corruption and accountability? I hope that we will see some semblance of vetting by Parliament. I've seen the committee that has been set, and I saw someone put the full names, and there was a meme of people laughing that, are they going to do any work at all? We saw the committee that was set to vet the former cabinet secretary Linturi, and we were given a very lovely show. And it's unfortunate, and I hope we'll see some semblance, because even the members of Parliament that the cabinet nominees that are coming back, I hope they are vetted as well on their time in office. The corruption scandals, the deaths that have been on the number of toll of deaths during their watch. Let us actually have some accountability and transparency, because if we are not able to have them, there is no there's no reset. The president said that this is going to be an opportunity to start afresh. How are we going to have a reset if you're not even asking questions on the time they were given? Because if you're saying that was a different job, and this is a new, we were friends then, now there's no friendship, now it's accountability, then you start from, even from the time you were serving, what did you do? Are you able to be held accountable for those positions that you were holding?
And Frank, on this issue of accountability, I mentioned earlier on that increasingly it's becoming more subjective rather than objective, because we've seen the Wiper Party already instruct their members not to pass any of these nominees, that they've not been vetted yet. Shouldn't they have waited, and you have confidence that the vetting will be done properly?
It is wishful thinking to really expect that this National Assembly that we have, with a lot of due respect to some of them that seem to understand the job, but we can clearly see that majority politicians today seemingly are more concerned with pleasing the president on either side of the aisle or their party leaders than really representing their constituents. So on that basis alone, while with due respect to the party leader of Waiba, I find that statement a little bit out of order. That is the order of the day. Even without saying it, they would still look up to him to give direction on what they should do. I would have expected that Parliament by now would have smelled the coffee and possibly even considered, I'm not sure how that would play in law, but there are submissions, there are memorandums that the Parliament has asked about these individuals to vet. How would it be if transparency began by publishing what they have been told, so that Kenyans can relate to the memorandums and how the MPs are putting to task these individuals. We know that this new cabinet is not impressive at all. It is a consolidation of intra-elite collusion. And there are individuals there that whose academic background is opaque than any dark night. There are individuals there with active corruption cases. There are individuals who've been reappointed when they are subject of these broken promises, these lifestyles that has led to widespread dissatisfaction with the political parties and the political class. So it's until after we have gone through from 1st of August, I believe, to when they finish the 20 nominees, I do not think that these members of parliament that we have, including that committee, have inspired confidence to a good level that a good job will be done. Okay. But that problem is not theirs. The problem is with the man at the top. It is the president's problem, and he must have given it due consideration. When you look at his strategies and look at his approach to resolving this problem, I think the president is interested in showing that he's regained control. When you listen to his firm tone, when you listen to his choice of what to say, thanking the security forces amidst the police brutality, shows you that this is a politician who's keen on safeguarding his interests now and making sure that they are secure in 2027. If you look at the flip-flop, including the opposition side, and how the two deputies, the chairman and the minority leader of ODM, were picked, and a statesman in the form and shape of Baba keeps on telling us yes and no, tells you that these are interests. They are intra-elite interests that are being settled. Okay. It is about going to the EU, and it's about 2027. And it's not about, I cannot see any shift in terms of policy, and I agree with my younger brother. There's no shift in policy in what this cabinet will look differently, and the one that he dissolved and then brought half of it. Okay.
Well, Onduko, two questions. One, do you feel like your movement as Gen Zs has been punctured? And two, there's one statement that Faith made, that this idea of being leaderless, do you think it's your weakness or your strength? Because then there's no formal way of engaging the Gen Zs. Nobody speaks on your behalf.
Well, that's a great question, Trevor. And I also would love us to understand that the problems you're facing are deep and systemic problems that didn't just start with this president. They've always been there. The old man corruption is more than 60 years old now. And even as we are continuing to fight that old man and ensuring that he's on his deathbed, there are people that will always come with oxygen tanks and continue to give lifeline to this old man corruption. Part of our original sin is tribalism. That's Kenya's original sin. And so I think that we just lack the leadership to address these concerns, right? And to look at them not as black and white, but to see the multi-layered, how multifaceted, and the many shades of gray that they're in. I am not going to lie to you that I'm optimistic about the future of this country if this political class still occupies their position. But of course, with what we are having, with the kind of awakening that we are seeing with this younger generation, there's a little bit of a chance of us trying to revive the dying embers of this nation, right? And here's why. How we are seeing things is different. How we would love to solve issues is different, but then we are limited in a sense. And partly because, you know, in a democratic society, the role of protestation is to bring the issues to the fore so that they can no longer be ignored. But I'm asking myself that if you realize that the people at the responsibility seat are either mad or they don't have the capacity to address that, and you keep on protesting, then who's mad? Right? I think that what we have to embrace at this point is to sort of have a both-end structure, which means that we have to keep on pressuring the government to do what is right, but also begin to see some sense of structure. That is what I think. And because there are people that have taken this opportunity to dance on the graves of the people that died as a consequence of just trying to raise their voices and be heard. So my sense is that, are we able to become an alternative leadership? Are we able to begin? I mean, if we do not trust ourselves to find our own leaders within the confines of our area, then are we really able to then get the right leaders in 2027, for example? I think what I would love to speak to my fellow younger people is that politics is a contact sport. Politics is about persuasion. And I think that President Ruto is a really great politician, but he may not be a very good leader. And here's why. After all these politics that he's played, you see, he's all over the country, making a case for himself. Are we able to create an alternative vision? Are we able to create alternative policies? Are we able to challenge the government and say, you know what, we cannot continuously say that your plan for creation of jobs is to ship out labor. Rather, create jobs right here, because jobs is not just about income, it's also about dignity. It's about being able to raise a family here, having a father here, having a mother here. They can be able to go to work, come back in the evening, and raise a kid.
But that structure is lacking.
Right. Of course, I think, of course, a structure is lacking, and there's so many people that are infiltrating the movement and benefiting from it. So I think my sense would be that I think moving forward, we really have to think deeply about being able not just to call out, but also be able to have our own alternative leadership, and persuade people, and reach out to people, and do a lot of civic education, and make this thing not just a Gen Z thing, but multi-generational thing. Get it with the people.
All right, there's a lot of feedback coming through, and then I'll come to each and every one of you to give their closing remarks because you're running out of time here. Let's bring up the feedback and see what you're saying. At Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya, use the hashtag Monday Report. Babu Michael says, my one question has been, was it necessary for the rage to happen so that the president can form a government of national unity? Will we move forward as a country with these reports of disappearances and deaths? Are we really serious? Okay. Moyale says, push for a regulation that puts Gen Zs at the center of key decision making, including the bare minimum of vetting public servants. Okay. And Chonje Peter, you say, corruption has made us to lose our nation esteem. We no longer believe in Kenya. We no longer believe that we have enough taxes. We believe that we are poor and can't create employment here in Kenya for the youths. We can't have quality education, health, and agricultural system. Sengeli says, 60 years of independence later, political parties have consistently failed to prioritize the people. They are designed to serve their owners, not the public. True multipartism requires a radical overhaul and re-engineering of our political system. Okay. Frank, I'll start with your closing remarks. So where do we go now from here?
I have some 5 questions for Kenyans, but first, I think, let me say that we are by now acutely aware of the power that citizens can wield. And there are 3 fundamental shifts that these protests have brought about. One is that citizens can potentially bring down a government if they want, and peacefully so, non-violent. We know who's been anarchist in these ensuing protests. Young people showed up on the streets peaceably with flags, with water bottles and their phones. And we know the brutal force that was met. The security forces have been congratulated amidst police brutality. And this is not fair for the president, and that's why it is not believable in as much as he continues to offer condolences. People are still missing. Families are mourning, and these are issues that have to be brought about. Politicians must be aware and must be reminded that blind loyalty without consideration to public opinion can be detrimental. And I hope that they are taking these instructions clearly and they are understanding this, that they will not make another mistake like the finance bill. And that as well, failure to represent Kenyans can lead to critical issues. And I would want to encourage our young brothers and sisters in that generation to follow up. 3 months from now, I think parliamentarians will already be 2 years into their term. IEBC will be in place. There must be an attempt to continue with the idea of recalling members of parliament who cannot be able to appreciate public opinion.
Yeah.
But I have one fundamental question. Is the aim of these young people to bring down Ruto, President Ruto, or bring about reforms? I think that would help all of us be able to appreciate the struggle and be able to contribute to the issues that they are bringing in. The idea of being leaderless, the idea of being partyless was fashionable at that point. There will be no, and let me use my own friend's Quaker Church, there will be no Quaker men on the ballot as Quaker men in 2027. Any Quaker man who wants to be elected, young or old, they have to relate to a political party. So these young people, we have to find ways to harness this energy positively and direct it, whether through political education, and make sure that they're understanding. And I have toyed with the idea, Trevor. Is it the right time to make voting compulsory, so that we can attach this issue to access to services? You want to access university loan? Did you vote? You want this service? Did you vote?
Can make it compulsory.
Make it compulsory, so that we continuously encourage these young people to turn out and do the job.
Okay, see, Faith disagrees with that, but Faith, your closing remarks on this.
Well,
where do we go as a country?
Refusing to vote can also be a statement. It can be saying you've looked at all the choices and you are no for all the choices, but that's aside.
It is siding with the oppressor.
So first of all would be justice for victims. I think as a nation, the problem we always have, even the first Mandamanos, was that people moved on and left those with their dead to struggle alone, those with their injured to struggle alone. I think as a nation and as a country, let's move together with everyone. So we should not leave any mother or father struggling with the pain and loss of their deaths of their loved ones. We've not seen even one police officer being brought to court to take plea. We've seen the former IG resigning, but that's not enough. We need to see heads roll so that people can be sure that the constitution is actually being implemented in this country. We cannot have the head of state saying that you must obey the constitution, yet he's lauding breaches of the constitution by the same National Police Service. His refusal by the National Police Service and his own government to obey court orders. So he's also, the Gen Zs refuse to obey the constitution because he has refused to obey the constitution. So we must have that. Secondly, dealing with corruption and accountability. We cannot continue to see things being slipped and lies here and there, paying bloggers to deal with propaganda one place or another. Let's have some honest conversations in this country. corruption is rife. Never has it been as rife as it is. We can't have scandal on fertilizer, then the same government is using its money to pay the farmers. Yet we should be getting that money back from those who have stolen from us. Let's have some serious, honest discussions. Let's stop lying to Kenyans. And lastly, let's have a multi-sectorial or multi-stakeholders discussion on issue base. Let's bring the Gen Zs and the different generations. Let's bring the professionals on the table. Let's bring the political class as well. Let's talk about education in this country and how can we ensure that more of our children are able to benefit from education. Let's talk about healthcare. Now that SHIF has been declared unconstitutional, let's not force it down people's throats. Let's go back and improve NHIF. Let's talk about opportunities. How can we harness and support the nascent areas that the young members want to grow in? We're talking about, people make fun of TikTok, but in other countries, these are multi-billion sectors. And so instead of making fun, how can the government sit and see how can they support the growth of those industries and support those who are investing in that area to build themselves up? So I think we need to change and shift and focus on issue-based and stop the politics, nepotism that we're seeing in our country. Let's come back to the right trajectory.
All right, Onduko, closing remarks, and you can answer the question that Frank asked. Was the aim to bring down the president or bring about reforms?
Of course, let me begin with a response to his question. We rise as one, we fall as one, right? We are one Kenyan family. And we also do believe that it is precisely a conflict of ideas that makes democracy advance. And what you're seeing right now is that conflict of ideas. We as the young people, we have our ideas, and we think that this is how you move a country forward. And then you have a political class on the other side that also has its own ideas of how to move a country forward, which is not inclusive. So what you're seeing right now is a very honest attempt to just move our democracy forward and expand its spaces. We are not trying to bring the president down. We are trying to ensure that the president, and honestly, I think that the president, away from being a leader, I think I would enjoy his company, for real. But I just happen to disagree with his policies, and we could talk about it again and again objectively. And I think there's no problem with that. It is very possible for people to disagree without being disagreeable, right? And part of what we also have to inject into our political conversations is how do we bring values into them? How do we ensure that our leaders are able to rise above the petty ways of doing politics? But like I said, I am not inclined to think that change will come with this political class. I won't lie that to you. And I think that young people, this crisis that we are in right now has given us a very noble opportunity to finally show the country that we are able to bring people together without these superficial ways. Look, I have worked before as an environmentalist doing environmental impact assessment. And that company, EcoScience, has allowed me to go through the country doing public meetings as a requirement for environmental impact assessment. And I tell you, Trevor, the truth is that people all over the country are the same. They want the same basic things, right? The political class would want to divide us, but I can assure you that beneath the superficial differences, we have so much that splices us together as the Kenyan people. But we have a leadership that brings all these commonalities and allows us to move forward. We don't. So my closing remarks is that we've seen the promised land, and we're not giving up. We have seen it. It's fair. It's beautiful. There's justice. There's opportunity to anyone who's willing to work hard. And we are going for it. And I'm confident that if we are able to plant our feet into the work of today, but cast our eyes to that future, we will bring about change. So I think we shouldn't be able to fear the discussion of having structure and being able to not just criticize, but also sell our vision, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this noble act of nation building.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for making time this evening. Faith Odhiambo, LSK President, Franklin Mkwanja, Executive Director, CMD, Onduko Rosasi, Youth Development Enthusiast, and please accept apologies from Diana Gishengo, the ED TISA. She wanted to come, but she couldn't make it, but she sends in her apologies, all right? On behalf of everybody else who made this possible, we say good night and God bless. Thank you so much for staying with Citizen TV.